Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Ayman Nazir and welcome back to Knowledge Realm. Students, yesterday we started a new course for our thesis preparation. We started part 1 of international relations and we studied the definition of international relations in detail and the elements of the subject also. Today students, we're going to cover scope of IR and we're going to study that how this scope makes the nature of IR a multidisciplinary nature. We're going to study this in detail and we're going to study the difference between the nature of international relations and international politics. So stay focused and let's get started. Anything that we study in a subject is the scope of the subject. And here I have made a very long list of the areas of IR. We study all these areas in IR, so consequently, this is the scope of IR. We study nation-state system in IR, we study international system and international society, then there are different approaches and theories of IR, then we study international political security in IR and international political community. Then IR gives different approaches to peace and there are many strategic approaches of IR. Also we study these approaches in IR. And then international political economy, these days this is the most important and influence creating area of IR. Then we study international political institutions like United Nations organization, like ASEAN, like NATO and all these institutions. Okay, then we study modern world history of 20th century. Then we study foreign policies of different nations in the world. So these are the areas that we study in IR and this is the general scope of IR. As I've explained in the previous slide, that anything that we study in a subject is its scope. So the first thing that we study in international relations is the nation-state system. What is this system and what does it mean? Well, simply it means that today almost all nations in the world have their own state. And in the previous lecture, I explained what a state is. It is the defined territory demarcated by a boundary in which defined population lives and that defined population is ruled by a sovereign government. So this is a state. So today almost every nation has its own state. For example, Pakistan. Here is Pakistan in the Southeast Asia. This is state Pakistan and it is inhabited by Pakistani people. We are Pakistani and we live in this state. This is our state. No one can deport us from this state. We are citizens of this state and we live here. Okay, then the people of India. This is the Indian state. Indian do have their own state, Indian nation. Then the people of China, Chinese is a nation. They have their own state. Then America in the western part of the world, this right here, American do have their own state. So this is the nation-state system. But it's not like this since ever. Before this system, there were empires, different empires, monarchies and civilizations, different kings and monarchs were ruling the world and there were different empires. Gradually, with the passage of time, the leaders of the world designed this system and different states started appearing on the map of the world. So today we live in a nation-state system. Every nation, almost every nation has its own state. So this is the area of IR. We study nation-state system in IR. Then we study international system and international society. Students, we know that there are different states in the world. There is USA, China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran. And all these states have designed an international system. And they live in a society. This society is called international society. Okay, so the society of states of the world, different states. We call this society the international society. And this society is ruled by an international system. This system is designed by the leaders of the world, by the states of the world. We have today norms, values, international law, different rules, codified procedures, and on these procedures we run our international society. This is international system. We have a system on which we run our international society. And what is international society? International society is the society of states, simply. And to run this society, to make peace in the society, we have an international system, a system of laws, codes, procedures, rules, norms, values. Okay, so we study this international system and international society in IR. These are the areas of IR. Then we have different approaches and different theories. This is another area of IR, and the scholars of IR use these theories to predict the future of the world, to forecast, to predict that how the different developments would unfold in the future of the world. For example, there is realism. There are some scholars of realism here. This is Kenneth Walls. He is a very well-known, prominent scholar of new realism. Kenneth Walls. Then there is liberalism, there is new liberalism, constructivism, Marxism. These all are different theories of international relations, and the scholar of international relations use these theories in predicting the future of the world. So we study this in international relations. Then we have another area of IR, that is international political security. Relationship between security environment and the political policies at the international level and vice versa. We study this thing in international political security. The subfield of this area is national power, security, balance of power. We study the different determinants and different elements of national power. There are different elements of national power. For example, the economy of a state. Economy of a state is the element of national power. If a state has a very strong economy, growing economy, then its power would increase. We know this. Today, China's economy is growing at a very good pace, at a very rapid pace. So this is increasing the national power of China. Then the military. Military is also an element of national power. Then the geographical features. Geographical feature is also an element of national power. There are different elements of national power, and we would study this in detail when we would be covering this area of IR, international political security. So this is another area of IR. Okay, here we study the relationship between security environment and the political policies at the international level and vice versa. We know that the political policies of different states create an impact on the security environment of the world. And this is what we study in this area of IR. Another area of IR is international political community. In this area, we study the state-made political environment. Two examples of state-made political environment is nationalism and globalization. Students, we know that under the administration of Donald Trump, the political environment of America was nationalism. Donald Trump's policy was nationalistic. He gave the policy of America first, make America great again. He did not care about the other nations of the world, and he wanted to focus on America only, and he wanted to renounce upon the authority of the world, the responsibility of the world. Students, we know that USA is the superpower, and we all know that with great power comes great responsibility. So USA, the superpower of the world, was responsible for entire world, for maintaining peace in entire world. This is the reason that USA started war on terrorism. But when Donald Trump took the oath of president, he did not want to involve in the matters of the world, but he wanted to concentrate on America only. So this is the reason he gave the policy Make America Great Again or America First policy. This is nationalism. He was nationalistic. This is what we study in international political community, the state-made political environment. Then another area of IR is approaches to peace. We know, students, that today the main aim of the world leaders is the prevalence of peace in the world. Everyone wants prevalence of peace in the world. No one wants war. No one wants economic decline or any chaos in the world. Peace is what a human wants. In fact, all the different creatures of Allah Ta'ala, everyone wants peace in their life. So we study approaches to peace in IR. This is a liberal perspective of IR. Here we study diplomacy and international law. We know that there are different codes and procedures and rules of international law. There is a very interesting just war theory that gives some conditions that make the war just, and if the situation fulfills some conditions, then you are justified to launch war on your rival, to start war with your rival. So the approaches to peace we study. This is another area of international relations. Okay, then another area of international relations is strategic approaches of IR. International relations give approaches to peace, and it gives strategic approaches also. In strategic approaches of IR, we study types and nature of war. We study total war. We study civil war, and we study proxy war. Moreover, we study weapons of war here also. We study weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, biochemical weapons. We study all these things in this area of IR, strategic approaches of IR. Another area of IR is international political economy. Students, we all know that today we are living in an era of economic globalization, and there are economic rivalries among great nations of the world. For example, USA and China. Now, students, the superpowers of the world are not competing on traditional nuclear armaments or military weapons, but the nature of the competition is changed now. The dimension of the competition is changed now. The superpowers are competing on the basis of economic growth. So this area of IR has achieved highest level of significance in the world and in the subject international relations. Here we study relationship between states and markets. We study different theories of economics. We study mercantilism, we study economic liberalism, and we study Bretton Woods system also. So this is a very important area of IR. Then we study different political institutions. We study United Nations, we study IMF, we study World Bank, how these systems, these international political institutions work, what are the structures of these different political institutions, and what impact they create on the world, what is their role. We study all these in international political institutions in this area of IR. Then we study modern world history also. We study the history of globe, but not ancient history. We study modern world history. For example, the two world wars. We study Cold War. We study fascism. We study communism, and we study all the modern history of the world. Then a very important area of IR is the foreign policies of the great nations of the world. We study how these nations make their decisions, what are the determinants of the foreign policies, and different theoretical models also of foreign policy. We study this area in IR. This is a very important area of IR. So this was all about the scope of IR. This is what we study in international relations. So students, now we have studied the scope of international relations. And by studying the scope of international relations, we can realize that the nature of IR is multidisciplinary. We study different disciplines in this subject. This subject covers parts of different disciplines. For example, we study political science in IR. We study relations among world's governments. This is the core part of political science, and we study this in IR. So IR covers a portion of political science. Then we study economics also. We study economic agreements among different nations, how politics impact economic policies, different theories of economics. We study liberalism, we study mercantilism, Marxism, and we study capitalism, we study communism also. So these are the theories that are oriented around economics. So this is how IR shares a portion of economics also. Then we study history. We study history of different nations. For example, we will study Russian Revolution in International Relations Part 2. We will study World Wars, 2 world wars. We will study Cold War, then different revolutions. So this part of IR covers history. So we can say that IR also has a good share of history in it. Then we study sociology also. We study society of different nations. We study impact of society on the politics of that nation of the world. Then we study law because we study international law, law of weapons of mass destruction, law of different agreements. We study all this in IR. So IR has a good share of law also. Then we study military strategies. We study war, we study total war, civil war. All of these things are covered by the scope of IR. We study all this in IR. So this is how the nature of IR is multidisciplinary. So students, we have studied the definition of IR in detail, the elements of the subject, and the scope of IR also. And all these things can lead to the creation of a confusion that how international relations is different from international politics, because these two subjects seem to be similar. And for layman, actually, for layman, these two terms and these two subjects are actually similar. Layman cannot differentiate between these two subjects. But for the scholars of IR and for the students of IR, there is a difference between international relations and international politics. And now we're going to differentiate between these two subjects, and we're going to understand that how IR differs from international politics. So let's start with this. Students, international politics is of a narrow scope. It covers only the relations among nations, and nations means states, or we can say governments. It covers only the relations among political entities. This is the reason we call it international politics, because it covers the events that are of political nature. It covers only the relations among nations, or we can say states, or we can say government. But international relations, it has a very wider scope. It covers relations among all significant global actors, and by global actors I mean state actors as well as non-state actors. It would cover the relations among USA and Al-Qaeda. Now, Al-Qaeda is not a political entity. Al-Qaeda is not a state actor. It is a non-state actor. It is a terrorist organization. So this kind of relation, we would study this kind of relation in international relations and not in international politics. In international politics, we would study relation among nations. We would study relation between USA and Pakistan. We would study relations between Pakistan and China. Or I can say that we would study relation between India or USA, because both the parties are of political nature. Both the parties are state actor. But in international relation, the scope is wider, and we would study relations among all significant global actors. Another example, a very good example of recent days, in international relations, we can study the relation between Pakistan and Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. We all know that Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is not a political entity, but it is a terrorist organization. Then international politics discusses relations of political nature only. What does it mean? That it discusses the relation among nations only political nature. On the other hand, international relations discusses relations of political as well as non-political nature. Another difference between the two subjects is international politics is an old subject, whereas international relations is comparatively young subject. It is a new subject. It came into being after the end of World War I in 1919. And in 1920, the Department of IR was opened for the first time in the London School of Economics. So international relations is comparatively a new subject. The scope, I'm not trying to say that everything that we study in international relations is new. No, not at all. Everything that we study in international relations has existed since the existence of human beings, since the existence of the different societies of human. But the subject is comparatively new. We have started this subject separately in 20th century actually. So international politics is an old subject, but international relations, it is comparatively new. Another difference is that international politics is stagnant. It is not evolving because the nature of the subject is a stagnant. It covers only relations among nations. On the other hand, the nature of international relations is evolving. It is not stagnant. It is evolving with each passing day, because with each passing day there are different developments and different research, different agreements taking place in the world. So international relations covers all of this. So the scope of international relation and the nature of international relation is evolving. With each passing day there are new developments, there are new agreements, new happenings in the world. So we can say that IR is evolving and international relations is stagnant. Another difference is that international politics analyzes things on state level only, whereas international relations has multiple level of analysis. It analyzes things on international level, state level, and on individual level also. So there's a difference of level of analysis also between these two subjects. I hope that now all the listeners are clear on the point that why international relations and how international relations is different from international politics. So students, now we have studied the difference between international relations and international politics. Here we're going to study the view of a scholar on difference between international relations and international politics. We're going to study the view of Hans Morgenthau. Students, Hans Morgenthau is a prominent scholar of international politics and international relations. He's a realist scholar. He advocates the theory of realism, and he's a prominent scholar of international relations. So let's see how he views international relations and international politics. Students, Hans Morgenthau believes that the core of international relations is international politics. It is true that international relations' scope is much wider than international politics, but the subject revolves around international politics. The core of this subject is international politics, and it is true actually, because all the developments revolve around international politics, and from international politics I mean that all the developments revolve around the political entities actually. Political entities means states. It is the role of a state that is significant in the world. So we can say that the core of international relations is international politics. And we know that international politics is the struggle for power. Realist scholars believe that the different states of the world are in continuous struggle for power with each other. All they want is struggle. All they want is power. This is the main aim of politics in the world. The main aim of politics in the world is the power. They want power. And we can prove it with a very good example of US and China. Today, China is getting stronger with each passing day, and US is perturbed with the growth of China. So there is a struggle for power between these two countries. USA do not want to be replaced by China, and China wants to replace USA. So both the countries are involved in a struggle for power. This is what international politics is. This is the view of a scholar of international politics on international politics. Hans Morgenthau believes that international politics is a struggle for power, and the core of international relations is international politics. He believes that international relations is, although it is much wider in scope, but its core is international politics. And he believes that international politics dominates in all manifestations of IR. And this is true actually. Because in IR, we study economics. Let's take an example of economics. In IR, we study international political economics. This is an area of IR. So who is involved in this economics? It is the political entities, and the political entities are the state. So actually we are studying international politics. International politics is the core of IR. Hans Morgenthau believes that international politics dominates in all manifestations of IR. Another example is the relation between US and Al-Qaeda, which is a terrorist organization. But who dominates here? One of the party is a political entity. The other party is, although the other party is not a political entity, but the relation is based on the political entity, that is US. So international politics dominates in all manifestations of IR. Hans Morgenthau gave a very good, he created a very good analogy. He gave an example that the structure of IR is like an atom. The structure of IR is like an atom. And we all know that the significant element of an atom is its nucleus. Atom would exist if the nucleus exists. And Hans Morgenthau believes that international politics is the nucleus of IR. Here I have designed a diagram here. I have drawn a diagram. International politics, this is the nucleus of IR. And all other things are the elements revolving around international politics. He believes that these elements, these electrons, or we can say different elements, different things revolving around the nucleus, these things would exist only if the nucleus exists. And if there is no nucleus, these things would not exist. The economic, cultural, religious, social. I have a very good example of this, the relation between Pakistan and Israel. We all know that Pakistan does not recognize Israel as a sovereign state. Pakistan does not recognize Israel as a state. So there is no relation, political relation, among these two political entities, Pakistan and Israel. Since there are no relations, no political relations, Pakistan and Israel cannot make relations of any other nature. There can be no relations of economic nature, social nature, religious nature, cultural nature. To make such kind of natures, to make such kind of relations, you need to have the relations of based on political nature. So there is no nucleus and there is no atom in the relation between Israel and Pakistan. Pakistan and Israel cannot develop relations because Pakistan does not recognize Israel as a sovereign state. So this is the main point of Hans Morgenthau, that the core of international relations is international politics. If there is no nucleus, there would be no atom. And the example is the relation between Pakistan and Israel. There is no nucleus between Pakistan and Israel, which means that there are no relations based on political nature. So we cannot expect the existence of relations of any other nature. So this was a very good example of the difference between international relations and international politics. And Hans Morgenthau believes that all other forms of relations depend on the political relations of the state. I hope I have made myself clear. Today we studied the scope of IR in detail. Then we studied how the scope of IR makes the nature of IR multidisciplinary. We studied this in detail. And then we studied the difference between international relations and international politics. So this is the end of this lecture today. We have studied enough today, and we would continue this series of international relations part 1, and I would try to cover the entire syllabus. Till next lecture, thank you, Allah Hafiz, and don't forget to subscribe Knowledge Realm.